In this region, where indigenous textiles continue to be made, most women weave on a four-staked loom, a loom where the weaver is able to sit down, get back up, move around, return without altering the tension of the tightly stretched warp yarns. Warp-faced weaving to create a four-selvaged cloth predominates in this highland area today, and apparently Mike Rodman took most of these landscape images for me in the 1980s. This one of a Yampu. It's striking how closely one travels near these peaks, considered sacred ancestors, grandfathers, the Apus. In the capital of Bolivia, La Paz is situated very near the base of this peak, Illimani, and since most of the Altiplano measures around 12,000 feet in altitude, it's understandable that these glaciated mountains very much part of the life that Andeans lead in this region. Any major feast day or work party or collective activity begins with libations to the peaks. Here, the woven textile has been placed on the ground and alcohol is being offered to the mountains. Called a mesa, the cloth is the table here, being prepared with selected leaves of coca, placed in the shells, and there are many other things. There's some dyed camelid fiber here, hair of the llamas and the alpacas, flowers, and prayers. Now, many ethnographies have been written that consider different Andean regions. One that I particularly appreciate is Mountain of the Condor by Joseph Bastian. And women of Kata, like these women, here arriving to watch a meeting in front of the church, weave and wear horizontally striped large mantles and carrying cloths. The beaded headbands identify them as from the region of Charazani, like those from Kata where Bastian worked. And Bastian told us that these various colored stripes to the Katans and people around them represent, as we were talking about in the gallery today, these very specific places in the landscape. They talk to the people, the women who are weaving them, about our geographical zones, the cochas, as Antonio said. And each person in Kata, as Bastian tells us, has a place shrine, has a literal place in the geography that they should continue, both male and female should continue to offer gifts to. Now, the region that I'm specifically talking about today is this one that Luis Lumbreras called the South Central Andes. And here's La Paz and Illimani that I was just discussing. I'll talk about Lake Titicaca here. This great plain, the Altiplano, that I'm mentioning a lot. And I was working down in San Pedro de Atacama and are fully convinced and have actually seen the costales that people have been trading and moving, of course, around, especially around the Salar. That's a formidable place. And into the valley, and then also, or into this oasis of San Pedro de Atacama. But then also a region that I'm excited to find that my colleagues are working down farther here in Argentina. There's a lot of connection there. I can see it in looms. And then I've also looked at some material here in the Pampa de Tamarugal that is going to be really, I think, important. I think it's much earlier. It's associated with string skirts that were a very early comparative material here to all the way up in Arica. And then lately I've been working, 2 years ago, I was in, I think this is it, the Osmore Valley in Moquegua, where I'll end the talk. Of course, I'll be talking about my favorite conversation, Tiwanaku and Wari, that's way up here. One other thing I wanted to mention, what is so specific to this region, here you can stand here and be in La Paz, and I actually did this, walk to the Cumbre, and then walk down into the Yungas, the jungle, in 5 days. And that I did in 5 days, but we were passed by a lot of other people. So it's very, very close. And then once you're there, You'll see the boats, and people are traveling, and you can get onto these, the tributaries to the Mamoré, and then, people were connected. People were, I'm sure, connected. So, of course, today non-native crops have been introduced into the high-altitude zones, like this one near Charazani, the woman sitting there in her field. And goats and sheep are now herded together with native Andean camelids, like here, also in the region of Charazani. This very high region is home to alpacas, prized for their lustrous and long fiber, and also their color, often in light tan or white. Really highly desired, Elena will be talking about, for their excellent ability to take dyed colors. These Macha women are wearing traditional clothing that identifies them. They're making chuño. After pouring water over small piles of potatoes, they press the potatoes and they rotate around each of the piles. They'll leave them at night to freeze, and over a period of time come back and pick them up and take them home, and they'll be stored. And this is one of the high areas of Macha where they're also herders, camelid herders. Maize, of course, is grown in the lower altitudes, south and west of the Altiplano, and it's one of the most important trade items with the highland crops. Of course, maize is drunk in the Andes. It's not eaten like in Mexico in the typical diet. I mean, you do, but really what you're growing it for is for drinking chicha. And the road that I was talking about, to reach some really inaccessible places, Andeans constructed ancient roads. They call this an Inca road, but it's certainly marking, and it was probably maintained by the Inca. This part is one part of the high pass just outside of La Paz, and it drops very quickly into the jungle. And note the really carefully constructed road and the canals that have been produced so that you can just move really fast over the surface, and the water will just move right over it. At the bottom of the road, after a few days' walk, one finds large areas where indigo now grows wild, walked right into it. And this area would have also been, of course, important for growing coca and collecting tropical animals and birds and gold mining. And then, as I was just mentioning, you can move then from there out all the way. This is one of the tributaries of the Mamoré, and the Mamoré then connects into the Amazon. Walking back to the Altiplano, Andeans are fortunate to have a llama as a pack animal, if you have that. Llama hair makes excellent strong fiber and costales for the carrying sacks that they're wearing and or carrying. And these sacks have identical form, coloring, technical structure to the carrying sacks in archaeological collections that I've examined from actually many locations in this area of the south central Andes. Llama caravans continue to move across the Altiplano carrying products. When we asked them, they were, most of the time it was salt to be traded with maize. And some large llama caravans are driven with several hundred animals. These are just moving across into a lower zone. And this one then with hundreds, there were more than 100 animals. And they then communities would come together in several herders with animals. The sacks are ubiquitous at market, here filled with potatoes and also chuño. And llama hair is a valuable commodity here laid out to sell, along with the pelts of llamas in the background. Llama meat is, of course, eaten and also dried as charqui for long-term storage. And you were mentioning today in the museum, the gallery, the llama bones. That's what is in this basket in a very raw form. But that's the principal weaving tool, and a woman will come here, grab one of these, wash it, and then, of course, sometimes the edge is still very rough, and make a pointed tool, a wincha, that will be then used as a pick and also as a beater. So in this first section, I just wanted to emphasize the idea of place and the interrelatedness of the area. And I just really like this photograph. I think that it says everything that I was trying to say in the very beginning. I was standing on the top of my Jeep and just happened to be here. When they're moving by, you can hear them in the distance, see them coming, you're right there. I must have been really very excited, I was probably laughing, and it's reflected back by the man that turns. But look at he's turning too in the exact same way. And I think when I was preparing for this, I thought, they're connected. They're connected. These are people that know each other. They walk with each other. They spend a lot of their lives together, these animals. Now, I want to turn to weaving. And in this region, with a brief overview of looms and structure, the customs, as costumbre nomás, the social life of cloth, as Nicola calls it. Chapaya women weave costales with a warp-faced stripes, created with the natural color, mostly here of llamas. They spin and ply, like all Andeans in this region of the southern Andes, with a drop spindle. She's working in the back. And they wear clothing that they've made from smaller frame looms, all with 4 selvages completely finished on the loom. And this woman working next to her, another Chapaya woman, is almost finished. And you can see that she's worked one end close to one side and then left it to begin on the other side. So she's coming back in her weaving to that first side. The shed stick is still in place to allow her to pick up one set of warps, and the heddle is connected to all the other set. Both of these can still be raised, providing an open area where her hands can easily move with the weft shuttle. Soon she'll have to remove the first the shed stick and then the heddle to finish the textile with a needle. Notice the shell that she's using for a beater. All the children and other members of the family and friends watch the process playing nearby. To me, this is one of the best examples of how customs are passed down. From older women to younger women, of course, when they're teaching them to weave, but also to the boys who will grow up to be men in the village, and they'll know exactly what it means to make fine clothing, to weave for the family, to create prized objects. The image captured all manner of clothing appropriate in this particular image to Chapaya children, who probably go through a lot of clothes as they grow, get dirty, but they have choices. All things that I'm constantly considering when looking at archaeological textiles and wondering, what are the parameters of this group? What constitutes a meaningful textile style that will separate this style from others, if it's possible to determine? Also, where people weave and wear hand-woven textiles, it's said that a man will choose a wife who's a good weaver. I always wondered about that. If these boys choose to remain in their community here, they are going to look for someone who can make the family's clothing. They'll be looking for a good weaver. If you're part of the process, wherever you live, you're going to understand the meaning of textile production and the value of cloth. 2 summers ago, I was walking with a woman who'd grown up in a weaving community in Moquegua, and she looked at me. She was talking to me about her experiences, and she said, "My mother told me that if I want to have some new clothes, I'd better start spinning." I thought, yeah, that's close. That's understanding it. In a different region, in a different zone, here in right near Sucre, Bolivia, one sees a great variation among garments within the same style, something else that I'm often thinking about when I'm looking at ethnographic textiles. These tarabuqueños wear a distinctive costume that even in variation remains clearly connected to the style known as tarabuco. Here the overskirt and carrying cloth or mantle that are worn by women who've come into the Sunday market at Tarabuco near Sucre. But most tarabuqueños live outside the town in small hamlets. Here this man is leaving town to travel back home wearing his brilliantly dyed hand-woven poncho that is very typical, his headdress and everything, to a tarabuqueño. While farming, it's the bag and the very small back cloth that clearly identifies him as a tarabuqueño. Whereas for festivals, Tarabuco women weave garments for men here specifically for a dance ritual. So archaeologically again, I'm always thinking about this level of variation. Today, most Andean weavers buy synthetic dyes to color their hand-spun yarns, or they buy already spun and dyed yarns in hanks, especially so that they can take these back home, and they'll probably retwist these to create a denser yarn for weaving. The four-staked loom is preferred for most large projects like men's warp-faced plain weave ponchos, overskirts, carrying cloths. This woman has just warped the loom and is now putting on the heddles. The loom cords have not yet been added, so the warp remains looped around the loom bars, actually on both sides here. A variation of the staked loom used in some areas, especially around Sucre, is this horizontal frame loom. Like the staked loom, or I guess vertical, like the staked loom, the weaver has the ability to come to the loom, leave it without moving the tensioned warp. This weaver, like the Chapaya woman, is close to completing her textile. Here the shed stick has been removed and exchanged for a thin rod so that she can keep track of one set of the yarns. She's just about to have to stop and weave the textile with a needle to complete it. And this textile is really very close. She's just in the last few stages. And here she is. This image captures the second part of the talk that I wanted to really point out, to make it very clear about weaving a four-selvaged cloth. The image here captures the whole project of weaving. This part is difficult. It takes great effort and skill to continue to pick up each opposing warp yarn across the web. But this is custom. This is the custom. This is how you're going to do it. It's definitely the Andean way, visible in archaeological textiles from all regions, both coast and highlands, during all pre-Columbian periods. My particular interests for many years now have been to determine a textile style that would have been part of the Tiwanaku culture that existed in the Altiplano from formative periods until about 1000 AD. The site itself covers many kilometers, and much of the modern village of Tiwanaku is built from ancient cut stone removed from the site. Standing monoliths remain around the site and are now, thankfully, and I'm very glad of it, housed inside the site museum. One of the famous monuments is a gateway, the Gate of the Sun, or monolithic gateway it's called, with carvings and relief at the top. During the period that I lived in La Paz, I spent some time at Tiwanaku and made this drawing of the Ponce monolith, and it gave me a really good idea, a really close sense of the way in which these icons were considered, at least in stone. The staff-bearing figures in front view and in profile, variations with humans and animals. Tiwanaku's sunken court, with its standing central statues, relates in scale and form to many other Altiplano centers, showing Tiwanaku's origin in this earlier widespread style known as Yayamama. For it's two-sided, there's a male on one side, a female on the other, Yaya and Mama, male, female images, on standing stela, like the tallest that's in the center. I'm not showing it very clearly to you, but it's in the center. It's over 6 feet tall, about 6 feet tall. It was discovered in the center of the court. At some point in the site's history, the Bennett stela was erected right next to the Yayamama statue. And this certainly gave an entirely new focus to the site. It's at least 4 times the size of the earlier stone. You all probably know this very well, but I wanted to make a point that Tiwanaku has a lot of other stone sculpture. And there are many stones that I would think are some intermediary place. I would call them early Tiwanaku. This one is called KN1, and Johann Reinhardt is standing here to show you the scale. It's going to be 12 feet, 14 feet higher with its head. It's missing its head. And another part of this is that it's only yaya. There's no mama. So there's a big change that has happened between the earlier yaya mama style and these monuments. There's several of them at the site. Tiwanaku was well situated in a verdant plain next to the Andean glaciated peaks, and it was close to the shore of Lake Titicaca. Tiwanaku must have been understood as the really center of the Altiplano universe, definitely in this part. Many people still use the reeds and collect those and make boats. And of course, people are fishing and using the resources of the lake. And note at the very top of the slide, you can see that there's this indention. They've are working quite close to these huge fields, these ancient raised fields connected to earlier Tiwanaku agriculture. At least during the early periods, there must have been a lot of water associated with the site. There are canals everywhere, canals that are running all around. Jean Janusek was recently talking about this moat. This is Wolfgang Schuler in the background photographing the so-called moat. But it's a remarkable rechanneling of the Katari River. And here are some of those just reused, actually, canals there, or parts of the stone. So, Tiwanaku, with all that water, is a terrible place for textile preservation. So I've been looking to places where Tiwanaku textiles could be identified, where they may have ended up or been brought there, and found that in San Pedro de Atacama, this large oasis is here. It's fed by underground rivers that surface briefly, irrigating separate vegetated zones, like the little one that you can see in the back, and there are others that are much more fertile. 9,000 burials have been discovered here by the priest, Padre Lepage, and others, mostly being excavated from the 50s to the 70s. Now, Tiwanaku textiles are not very well known. This one from Coyo, one of the ayllus of San Pedro de Atacama, they're brittle, they're extremely fine. This one had over 90 threads to the centimeter. So that's 3 centimeters to an inch. That's just really remarkable. And when they were discovered, Padre Lepage wrote in his notes, painted textiles. So often they're brown in color. So I've been thinking about that maybe they're vicuña, but they haven't been identified. It's an idea. And my colleague, Malka Helfman, helped me create this image that's like the ones that William Conklin has been recreating and helping us understand these wonderful Tiwanaku textiles. 2 Tiwanaku textiles that Carolina Cajuero has analyzed and published are these from Pulcayo near Salinas on the left in Bolivia, and Pica near Antofagasta. She did a thesis about Pica from the North Chilean coast. And a wonderful tunic, also from Coyo, was preserved with 2 different hats and plain warp-faced textiles underneath. When I studied the other burials in Coyo Cemetery that had been excavated in the 70s by the priest Padre Lepage, I noticed a style that I understood to be related together to a single group of men and women buried together with, and they were the group that had the Tiwanaku textiles, as well as plain and warp-striped and warp-faced garments. And this is kind of just a really brief look at that. There's some 15 individuals that one can identify. And even the individual who was wearing a 4-pointed hat that's very much associated with Tiwanaku, and he's the only one that's been discovered in San Pedro de Atacama, at least as far as I know yet, had a costale and a warp-faced textiles that were associated him with the wider group. And then the other aspect was that in the same cemetery, there's, to me, a very different style. These people make looped hats, and they have a different kind of embroidery, and it's much more widely distributed in the area in Coyo. It's also found in Solcor and in Quitor and in other places. So I thought that these were probably very different groups. I called it ethnicity. It's clearly identity. Recent isotope analysis says that they're all San Pedro de Atacama. They're all here. So I'm probably thinking that one group has been for a long time affiliated with the highlands in a specific way that allows it to have these textiles like this one that William Conklin was able to take off the bundle and really conserve it. It's a wonderful, glad we have this. And I look at this is a Tiwanaku tunic. It's made with all 4 selvages. I look at it though, and I think, I think, why tapestry and stripes? I mean, anybody who weaves tapestry knows you can weave what you want, and you can weave it where you want. So why put it in stripes like this, making it look like, to me, a warp-faced? To me, there's some before the Tiwanaku tunic here. There is some warp-faced, warp-patterned precedent. Now, this thing to remember, those of you that are interested in the weaving, as I'm really always very interested in how it's constructed. It would have been, it's folded still, it's still sewn up the side, but it would have been woven, opened, and the weaver sits here and weaves, all selvages are complete, so that you have this neck slit that you have to deal with. So those are warped separately, and they are discontinuous in that section, okay? But then you're sitting there in front of that weaving, and you can't have that heddle bar run across the whole way. You're going to have to heddle this separately. And it's just complex. And you're going to have to be weaving with a needle right up there where you're weaving the neck slit. So I'm making a point here that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The looms would be, the loom would be then only about 40 inches tall. They're about 40 by 40, give or take a little bit, but they're about 7 feet wide. So that's a lot of maybe vicuña, and a very different kind of construction. That's another thing about tapestry. It takes patronage. It really does. It's not woven now. You need somebody to supply you with all that material and some reason to create it. Now, I would suggest that there are a lot of prototypes in the Andes that I know of, that I can think of. That would be before Tiwanaku tapestries. An Alta Ramirez tunic begins in actually it begins in weft stripes, is woven over warp stripes, continues warp stripes, and then comes back to weft stripes. It's warp-faced and then weft-faced at the very bottom. And then I'm thinking, of course, about all of the textiles that Margaret Young Sanchez has been describing. And those have tapestry that have been inserted in warp-faced textiles. So I think this warp-faced and weft-faced is very much part of this tradition. So just another map that shows you specifically where Tiwanaku is located, there at the top. So this brings me to a place where I would like to talk about one of my favorite topics, comparisons between Tiwanaku textiles and Wari textiles that coexisted in the southern Andes for several hundred years, from about 600 to 1,000. Tiwanaku with its capital on the shores of Lake Titicaca, Wari with its heartland near Ayacucho, Peru. And it's a place where Ryan Williams and Paul Goldstein have been working. Ryan with Wari material and Paul here standing at the Omo Temple. In a rare find, and I think it's the only one that I know about, Goldstein discovered a compacted mass of tapestry that included both Tiwanaku and Wari textiles. We've recreated, from a tiny fragment of a Tiwanaku textile, we recreated it to be a 6-banded tunic with one of these sacrificer figures repeating on a blue ground. The victim was held out in front by the sacrificer, and you can identify it by its little eye, and it has a white hat and a chin strap, and the part of the sacrificer's neck band ends in 4 little balls, and that part would be on the other side of the strap. One other really important feature, and you can't really see this in this particular slide, but this Tiwanaku textile has blue warp yarns, and those warp yarns are going to be covered. And we realized then, when we looked back at other Tiwanaku textiles that I know about in San Pedro and also from Moquegua, that the background stripe color really is identified and reflected and supported by the warp yarn. So where it's red, you'll have red warps underneath. Here, blue, it's the first time I've ever seen it. Yellow, kind of a cream color or yellowed warp. And brown, of course, on brown. And this is pretty unusual, since this is a weft-faced textile. It's going to be covered completely. Now, in the Moquegua Tiwanaku burial, the Wari tapestry was evident in its makeup and structure more than any image that might be possible to reconstruct here. The coloring of the Wari tapestry is muted, suggesting that this particular textile might have been woven somewhere distant from the Wari center. One end of the textile is finished with chained warps, and the other with an unwoven warp section, as if it was taken directly off the loom before completion. But the most telling element is the use of cotton in its construction. Fine weft interlock tapestry over cotton warps. I've really been specific in deliberately omitting a discussion here about the really long-standing use of cotton in Andean textiles to make my point here. No Tiwanaku weaver would warp cotton yarns for clothing, much less as a base for the principal elite male garment. In the Tiwanaku colonies in Moquegua, thousands of burials have been discovered, and very few cotton textiles are placed in them. There are some exceptions, but it's just very few, and not for clothing. In contrast, I want to show, this is what I was doing 2 years ago in Moquegua. I was looking at the domestic area. I really wanted to see what it was like. If you really have Tiwanaku colonies here, what do you have there left in the homes? And there's a lot of cotton. There's a lot of cotton in the domestic areas. They're not putting them in burials. It's not going to identify them when they go. It didn't identify them, I think, in the highlands. But they know what the good use of cotton. I would really, if I wanted to, I would really love to identify what's in these cotton cloths. They're probably used for all kinds of domestic uses. And cotton seeds, cotton of all different colors, spun cotton. Cotton is there. Cotton is in the Tiwanaku colonies, but it doesn't identify the people. They're not using it that way. And the one on the right was really fascinating. That was cotton being used as I'll use the word, rag. I mean, it looked as if it had just dropped. And when the archaeologists sort of picked it up and turned it over, there's the red pigment. And the temple walls it was at the Omo site, and the temple walls have a lot of red on them, so they think that maybe this was being used for burnishing the walls. Now, what is it about the Wari that they use cotton because that's where I'm about to go. Cotton is in the repertoire for Wari, and in Moquegua, Wari's settlement here that Ryan Williams has discussed at Cerro Baul. I think there have not been any finds of textiles. I keep asking. But Wari settlements just further north at Baringa, and Tiffany Tung has described those, and also the really wonderful work at El Real near Baringa, a Wari tomb. Taboada and Cecilia Quequezada describe cotton everywhere. Cotton is packed into the mummy bundles. All the plain weave textiles of the mummy bundles are cotton. There's cotton in domestic, and there's cotton in the tombs. Cotton is part of Wari textiles. And I think that when you just look at the map, Wari and Cecilia Quequezada and Freddie Taboada and also Justin Jennings suggest in their article that there's so many relationships with Nazca textiles. They just see a lot of relationship. And I think that, of course, many people have said that when they look at the geography and the connections with Wari. And I also wanted to mention that there actually have been textiles that have been found at Wari. These are on the right. This is a detail of a balanced weave of cotton and camelid fiber. These are 2 small bags. These are miniatures, actually, that were found in a miniature deposit. Arabel Fernandez has studied these, and William Isbell gave me these images. But tapestry there at the top is fine weft interlock tapestry over cotton warps. So this brings me to the Wari tunic. Everyone here in this group knows Wari tunics. I've, as Nikki mentioned, have really been looking at things in context. And there really are a lot of Wari textiles that one could study in context. These are 2 that Max Ule excavated at Chimucapac. And they conform to all of the parts of Wari tapestry tunics. This is one that Vuka Rusakis worked with me in El Brujo at the Wakakau. And if I had time, I would talk to you really about the social realm of these Wari textiles, because of course they come with and they are part of the burial units of individuals, usually elite men. And this one was burned, you can see the burned edge, and had been taken probably off of a bundle that had this as its outside covering. And then the excavators took this, found this with the bundle sitting on top of it. And so, and then when we opened up the bundle had a totally new set of clothes. So I think that these probably are kept for a long time as very meaningful. And then they were part of the burial ritual. Actually, the tomb was burned too. And you can see that this kind of burning relationship with Wari textiles. Ule found it in Chimucapac, and there's a lot of stories here with Wari textiles. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is that Wari textiles are so different from Tiwanaku textiles. There's no way to see these as similar. They're woven in 2 parts. They always have this. They're cut from the loom, and to me. And they're always, not always woven with cotton yarns, but almost always cotton is part of these very, here's part of that collection of textiles that were burned, and then the bundle was placed on top of these, and that on the top right is part of the new set of garments. So some of the features of a Wari textile, and many of you know these very well, there'll be a cut and then it's braided edge, and then usually it's on the center, and it'll be very, very closely worked so that you can hardly see it, like on the far right. And then the other edge will have a they'll pull out the loom cord and chain it, and often that will be on the neck area. And then the thing on the far right, these are bichrome warps of both cotton and camelid. And this is all what Junius Bird and Milica Skinner had seen before. It's marvelous what they have done with really looking underneath all of the weft yarns to see what the composition of the warp yarns were. And when they did that, they saw that the Wari textiles are not even worked on this, worked on the same warp. They're made of two separate warps. And this all just says workshop to me. This totally looks like something that you have lots of yarns of different types. You're going to warp the loom. You're going to use what you have. You're going to make them all even, because we all know how beautiful and perfect these Wari tunics are. But it's all going to be covered anyway. And this is an image that I took at Tapestry Workshop region just outside of Cochabamba, Via Rivera. And in the far right of the slide, you can see that these are colored yarns. They have done the same thing. They're using whatever they have to use as a warp. And then the other thing is, what I really think happened was in these Wari textiles, here's a Wari and a Tiwanaku one, I think they're not copying each other, but I really think that the model of a Wari textile comes after the model of a Tiwanaku textile. And the Tiwanaku textile, I think, had a long tradition and really is based in warp-faced weaving. And it seems to me that the people who were creating this Wari textile are just, I would say they're not Highland. Like the Highland Altiplano that I'm talking about. And it's not an Andean textile. It's there. So I can see that it's removed from a tradition. It's removed from a close tradition, like I've tried to show you as the Tiwanaku and all of the Tiwanaku. And it looks to me like Nazca weavers, as exquisite as they are, have come up with this idea that let's do this, but instead of making a forced selvage textile and weaving it with that tiny needle, we're used to wearing two parts in tunics, and let's do this. Let's figure this out. So, es costumbre nada más. I think that's how this all happened, and I wanted to present this today. Thank you.